The moment Marisol Quintero slammed the phone down on the counter, she had no idea she'd just hung up on the most dangerous man in 3 states. She only knew one thing: nobody was going to call her diner a dump and get away with it. Not on a Tuesday, not ever. Outside, the rain was starting to fall in that slow, hesitant way Ohio rain always did, like the sky itself wasn't sure whether to commit. Inside, the smell of pecan pie and burnt coffee filled the small space she'd kept alive for 6 years on grit alone. She didn't know it yet, but in less than 9 minutes, a black armored car would pull up outside her window. The man inside it had buried better people than her, for less than what she'd just done. But here's what nobody at his table that morning could have predicted: Marisol Quintero had buried something worse than a man. She'd buried the part of herself that flinched. Before we go any further, do me a favor, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches tonight. And if you stay till the end, you'll understand why this single hung-up phone call ended up changing 2 lives forever. Hit that like button. Let's begin. The Bluebird Diner sat on the corner of Halsted and Ninth in a part of Cleveland the new money hadn't reached yet. Marisol's father had built it with his own hands in 1987, back when this neighborhood still had its own rhythm: steelworkers at 6 a.m., school teachers at noon, jazz musicians at midnight after their gigs at the old Velvet Room 2 blocks over. The Velvet Room was a vape shop now. The steel mill had closed in '09. But the Bluebird was still standing, and Marisol intended to keep it that way, even if it killed her. She was 32 years old. She had her father's stubborn jaw and her mother's tired hands. And every morning at 4:45 sharp, she unlocked that front door, flipped the chairs down off the tables, and started the coffee like it was a prayer. That Tuesday morning had started normal. The breakfast rush thinned out by 10. Old Mr. Cabrera was nursing his third cup of decaf in the window booth, working through the crossword like he'd been doing every morning for the last 11 years. Lupe, her cook, was in the back scraping the flat top. The little bell over the door hadn't rung in 20 minutes. That's when the phone behind the counter rang. Marisol picked up on the second ring. Bluebird Diner. Yeah, this is Vance. I need to book your place out for a private dinner. Thursday night. The whole place. No customers, no waitstaff but yours, no questions. The voice was male, mid-40s maybe, the kind of voice that had never been told no in its adult life, smooth on the surface, sharp underneath, like someone running a knife along velvet. I appreciate the interest, sir, she said carefully, but the Bluebird doesn't do private bookings. We're open to everyone, or we're closed. That's the rule. A pause. Then a small, amused exhale. Sweetheart, I don't think you understand. I'm not asking what your rules are. I'm telling you what's happening Thursday night. Marisol felt the heat climb up the back of her neck. She kept her voice level. Then I think you've got the wrong diner. I've got the right diner. I drove past it last week. Frankly, the place is a dump, but my associate has some sentimental nonsense about it from when he was a kid, and I owe him a favor. So I'm being generous. I'll pay you triple your monthly take. Cash. You close Thursday. You cook what I tell you to cook. You keep your mouth shut, and everybody walks away happy. Are we clear? She looked around at her diner, at the wallpaper her father had picked out in 1987, at the booth where her mother used to sit and shell peas for the soup, at the framed dollar bill from the very first customer hung above the register, and something inside her went perfectly, dangerously still. Sir, she said, what's your full name? Excuse me? Your full name. So I know exactly who I'm telling no to. The silence on the other end stretched for a long second. Vance Roker. Mr. Roker, she said, her voice as warm and even as the coffee in the pot beside her. The Bluebird is not for sale, not for rent, and not for closing. Not Thursday, not ever. You can call my dump anything you like, but you can't call it yours. Have a beautiful day. And she hung up. Lupe was standing in the kitchen doorway, dish towel frozen in her hand. Mari, she said slowly. Who was that? Some loudmouth. Mari. Lupe's face had lost color. Vance Roker? You know him? Everybody on this side of the river knows him. Madre de Dios. Mari. What did you just do? Marisol opened her mouth to answer, and that's when she heard it, the deep, throaty hum of an engine pulling up to the curb outside. Not a regular engine, the kind of engine that belonged to a vehicle that didn't worry about gas prices. She turned toward the window. A black Cadillac Escalade with windows so dark they swallowed the gray morning light had stopped directly in front of the Bluebird. Behind it, a second one pulled up, then a third. The doors didn't open immediately. They just sat there, idling, while the rain tapped harder against the glass. Mr. Cabrera lowered his crossword. Lupe whispered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. Marisol's hand was still resting on the phone. She could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. The rear door of the middle Escalade finally opened. A polished black shoe stepped down onto the wet asphalt, and then she saw him. He was taller than she'd expected. That was the first thing. Voices on phones lie about height, but this man was easily 6'2", broad through the shoulders in a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than the Bluebird's monthly rent. Mid-40s, like she'd guessed. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. A face that wasn't handsome the way magazine men were handsome, it was carved, sharp at the cheekbones, and held the kind of stillness that took a person a long time to learn. He didn't run for the door even though the rain was picking up. He walked, slowly, each step deliberate, like a man who had never in his life been late to anything because nothing started without him. Two men got out of the cars behind him. Both were wide. Both had their hands clasped in front of them in that particular way that meant something heavier than hands was hiding inside their coats. They didn't follow him to the door. They took up positions on the sidewalk, one to each side, eyes scanning the street. Marisol's mouth had gone completely dry. She wiped her palms on her apron black with little white birds embroidered on the pocket, a gift from her mother on her 30th birthday, and walked out from behind the counter. "Mari," Lupe hissed. "Mari, no. Stay back here. I'll go. It's my diner, Lupe. It's your life." But Marisol was already crossing the floor. "Mr." Cabrera quietly folded his crossword and slid out of his booth, and for a wild second Marisol thought the 78-year-old man was going to try to stand between her and the door. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. He sat back down, slowly. The little bell over the door chimed the same cheerful tinkle it had made for 38 years, and Vance Roker stepped into the Bluebird diner. He didn't look around at first. He took off his leather gloves one finger at a time, folded them neatly into his coat pocket, and only then let his eyes travel across the room. He saw the wallpaper, the framed dollar bill, the blackboard listing today's pie. The single string of Christmas lights Marisol had never gotten around to taking down from last December because her mother had loved them. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes flickered, just for a half second. Then it was gone. "Marisol Quintero," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's me. You hung up on me." "I did." He took 2 steps forward. The 2 men outside shifted slightly, not for any reason she could see. The diner felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Up close, his eyes were a strange color gray, almost the color of the rain itself. "Do you know who I am?" "I know what you are now," she said. "Lupe filled me in. And you still don't apologize. For what, exactly? Telling you no in my own diner?" A muscle jumped in his jaw. Not anger, exactly. Something more interesting than anger. He looked at her, really looked. The way a man looks at something he wasn't expecting to find, and Marisol made herself hold that gaze, even though every instinct in her body was screaming to look down at her shoes. "Most people," he said quietly, "who speak to me the way you just did on that phone do not get to speak again." "Is that what you came here to tell me, Mr. Roker? That I should be quiet now?" "No." He glanced once more around the diner. At the wallpaper. At the dollar bill. At Mr. Cabrera, who was pretending very hard to be invisible in the corner booth. "No, Miss Quintero. I came here because in 26 years, no one has ever called this place a dump to my face and made me feel like I was the one being rude." She blinked. "I want the dinner," he said. "Thursday night. And I'm not going to threaten you. and I'm not going to triple anything. I'm going to ask you, with the door open and my men outside, if you would consider doing this for a man whose oldest friend ate breakfast at this counter every Saturday morning for the first 16 years of his life. He's dying, Miss Quintero. He has 6 weeks, maybe 8, and the only thing he's asked me for, the only favor in 30 years of friendship, is to come back here one more time. The diner went absolutely silent. Even the rain seemed to quiet itself against the window. Lupe had come halfway out of the kitchen and stopped, dish towel still in her hand. Mr. Cabrera had set down his pencil. Marisol felt the floor shift slightly under her feet. She had been ready for a fight. She had been ready to be threatened, intimidated, and possibly arrested. She had not been ready for this. "Who's your friend?" she asked. Her voice came out softer than she'd meant it to. Vance Roker reached slowly into his inside coat pocket. Lupe inhaled sharply and pulled out a black and white photograph, faded at the edges, the kind that had spent a long time inside a wallet. He set it gently on the counter and turned it so she could see. It was a photo of 2 boys, maybe 7 and 8 years old, sitting on stools at this exact counter. Behind them, smiling and pouring coffee, was a man Marisol would have recognized anywhere on earth. It was her father. And the smaller of the 2 boys, the one with the gap-toothed grin and the chocolate milk mustache. She'd never seen his face before in her life. But the older boy, the one with his arms slung around the smaller one's shoulders, the one looking up at her father like he hung the moon. That boy had Vance Roker's eyes. Marisol picked up the photograph with hands that were, embarrassingly, not quite steady. She angled it toward the window light. Her father, Hector Quintero, gone almost 6 years now from a heart that had simply gotten tired of working, was wearing the same green apron she still kept folded in the drawer beneath the cash register. He looked young in the photo, maybe 30, younger than she was right now. He was laughing at something one of the boys had said. "When was this taken?" she asked. "Spring of 1989. My mother used to drop us off here on Saturdays before she worked her shift at the laundromat down the street. Your father fed us for free for almost 3 years. He never once let us pay. He told my mother that boys don't grow on empty stomachs, and that if she didn't like it, she could fight him about it." A small, almost smile passed across Vance Roker's face and disappeared. She did fight him about it. Twice. He won both times. "My father never told me." "Your father wasn't the kind of man who told stories about his own kindness, Miss Quintero. He just did kind things and went home." She set the photograph down very carefully on the counter, the way you set down something that might break. Mr. Cabrera, in the corner booth, had silently risen and was easing toward the door. He paused beside Marisol on his way out, squeezed her shoulder once with a hand that had known 78 years of work, and let himself out into the rain. The bell tinkled. The door closed. Lupe stayed in the kitchen doorway. She wasn't pretending to do dishes anymore. "The boy with you in the picture," Marisol said. "That's the friend who's dying? His name is Theo Marchetti. He grew up 2 blocks from here, same as me. We were cousins by blood, brothers by everything else. He went into the legitimate side of things. Built a construction business out of nothing, 3 kids, a wife who actually likes him, the whole picture. I went a different direction." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. 6 months ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Last week, he asked me one thing to bring him back to the only place where he ever felt like a kid who belonged somewhere: your father's diner. Marisol had not cried in front of a stranger since she was 11 years old. She did not intend to start today. She turned slightly toward the coffee pot, refilled a mug she did not need to refill, and let the steam do something useful with the water in her eyes. "Thursday night," she said. "Thursday night. How many people?" 7. Theo, his wife, his 2 adult children, his oldest friend besides me, his nurse, and me. That's it. No security inside. My men stay on the sidewalk. We eat what you cook. We pay whatever the bill comes to. We leave by 10. That's the entire ask." She was already running numbers in her head: how she'd reorganize the floor, what she'd need to pull from the freezer, whether Lupe could come in early, and then she stopped herself. She set the coffee pot down. "Mr. Roker," she said, "I'll do the dinner. But not for triple, not for cash, not as a favor. I'll do it at full menu price, like any other customer, and I'll keep the diner open to walk-ins until 7 that night the way I always do. After 7, the dining room is yours until close. That's how my father would have done it, and that's how I'm doing it." He was quiet for a long moment. "And in exchange," she continued, "I want one thing. Name it. There's a woman 3 doors down, Renata Vosberg. She runs the little bookstore Vosberg and Daughter. She's been there as long as the Bluebird has. Last month, her landlord tripled her rent because some developer wants the whole block. She's going to lose the store by the end of the year. She's 71, Mr. Roker. That bookstore is the only thing she has left of her husband." Marisol's voice did not waver. "I want you to make sure that doesn't happen. I don't care how. I don't want to know how. I just want her to still be in that store next Christmas, paying the rent she paid last Christmas. That's my price for Thursday." Vance Roker stared at her. For the first time since he'd walked through her door, his composure cracked, not broke, just cracked, the way ice does the first time someone steps on it. He let out a single short breath, almost a laugh, almost a sigh, and the sound of a man who had just realized the negotiation he'd walked in expecting was not the negotiation he was now in. "You're asking me to save a stranger's bookstore," he said slowly, "in exchange for letting me feed my dying friend in your diner. That's exactly what I'm asking. You don't want money for yourself. I have a diner, Mr. Roker. I have enough." He looked at her for what felt like a very long time. Then he pulled a slim leather notebook from his inside pocket, the same pocket that had held the photograph, and wrote something down with a silver pen. He tore the page out, folded it once, and laid it on the counter beside her father's image of him as a child. "Renata Vosberg's rent," he said quietly, "will be paid through the end of her natural life. Her landlord will, by tomorrow afternoon, be very motivated to leave her alone. You have my word. I don't know what your word is worth, Mr. Roker." "You will." He picked up his gloves, began pulling them on. "Thursday at 7:30. Theo will arrive in a wheelchair. He'd prefer the booth by the window if it's available." "That's my mother's booth," she said before she could stop herself. "It's always available." He paused at the door. The rain had picked up again, hammering hard now, blurring the world outside the glass into watercolor. Without turning around, he said, "Your father was a better man than my father, Miss Quintero. I've spent 38 years trying to figure out how he did it on the wages he made. If you ever want to tell me, I'd like to hear it." The bell tinkled. He was gone. The 3 black cars pulled away from the curb in a smooth, unhurried line. Lupe came out of the kitchen on shaky legs. "Mari," she whispered, "what did we just agree to?" Marisol looked down at the folded slip of paper. She didn't open it yet. She picked up her father's photograph instead, and for the first time in 6 years, she let herself feel him standing right there beside her at the counter. That night, after the last light in the diner was off and the front door was locked, Marisol did not go home. She went upstairs. There was a small apartment above the Bluebird that her parents had lived in for the first 11 years of her life. After her mother died of a stroke when Marisol was 14, her father had moved them both into a real house 20 minutes away because he couldn't sleep above the kitchen anymore. The apartment had been used as storage ever since. Marisol kept it clean, but she rarely went up. Tonight she climbed the narrow back staircase with a flashlight and a key she hadn't touched in over a year. The apartment smelled like old paper and the faint ghost of her mother's lavender soap. She crossed the living room, past her parents' wedding photo on the wall, past the green velvet couch nobody had sat on in 2 decades, and stopped in front of the closet in what used to be her childhood bedroom. Inside the closet, in a cedar box on the top shelf, was a stack of letters bound with kitchen twine. She had not opened that box in 7 years. Not since the day she'd come home from law school and told her father she was quitting. She'd been 25 years old then, 3 semesters into a JD at Case Western, top of her contracts class, full ride. Her father had been so proud of her he carried her acceptance letter in his wallet for 2 years. And then the diner had started losing money, and he'd started losing weight. And he'd told her, laughing it off the way he laughed everything off, that he just had a little chest pain. Nothing serious, just old age catching up. She dropped out the next week, came home, took over the books, took over the kitchen on Sundays, took over everything she could lift off his shoulders, while telling herself she would go back. Just 1 year. Just until he was steady. Just until he'd died 11 months later. She had never gone back to law school. She had told herself, and everyone who asked, that she had no regrets, that the diner was where she belonged, that her father's dream had become hers. And most days that was even true. Most days. But there was a reason she didn't open the cedar box. She opened it tonight. On top of the stack of letters was the one her father had written her the morning she came home from Cleveland for good. He'd handed it to her at the bus station, told her not to read it for a year. She'd waited 8 days. Marisol, I'm not going to thank you, because what you did for me is not the kind of thing a person should be thanked for. It's the kind of thing a person should be argued with. I argued with you, and you didn't listen, which means you got that from your mother. God help us both. I want you to promise me something. Not now. Someday. The day you stop being able to feel your own dreams when you wake up in the morning. The day you forget what your own voice sounds like when it's not taking somebody's order, that's the day you go back. Not for me. For her. For yourself. The diner is bricks and pie. You are not bricks and pie. Don't bury yourself in this place, mija. I love you too much for that. Papa. She read it twice. She set it down on the floor of the closet. And then, sitting cross-legged in the dark with her flashlight pointed at the ceiling, Marisol Quintero finally let herself cry the way she had not cried since she was a girl, not loudly, not dramatically, just with her hands pressed flat against her face and her shoulders shaking in the silence of the apartment her parents had loved each other in. She stayed there a long time. When she came back downstairs, the diner felt different. Or maybe she did. She walked behind the counter, opened the drawer beneath the register, and pulled out the green apron. She held it against her chest, then she folded it, with care, and laid it on top of the cedar box she'd carried down with her. She set both on the booth where her mother used to shell peas. She had a dinner to cook on Thursday, and after that she didn't know yet. But the door her father had told her to walk back through was a door she could feel for the first time in 7 years. It was still there. She had not lost it. She had only stopped looking. She slept that night above the Bluebird, on the green velvet couch, and dreamed of a courtroom she had never finished walking into. Wednesday morning, Marisol woke up at 4:12 a.m. The menu already written in her head. She did not write the menu rich people would expect. She did not look up Thursday's prefix at the steakhouse downtown. She thought about a sick man in a wheelchair coming home to the only place that had ever fed him for free, and she cooked in her head the way her father had cooked for him in 1989, buttermilk biscuits, tomato soup with the basil from the planter on the back stoop, a pot roast that had been her grandmother's, simmered 8 hours with carrots and pearl onions, cornbread. And for dessert, the only thing Theo Marchetti's 7-year-old mouth had ever specifically asked her father for. According to a margin note Marisol had once found in her father's recipe book, Theo's pie, double crust, extra cinnamon apple pie, just apple pie, the way Hector Quintero had made it. She called Lupe at 5. Lupe picked up on the first ring because Lupe had not slept either. I need you tomorrow from noon to close, Marisol said. Double pay. And I need you not to be nervous. Mari. Lupe, please. I'll be there at 11. By 7 a.m., the Bluebird was open and humming the way it always did. The breakfast regulars came in, one after another, and Marisol noticed something strange. They were quieter than usual. Mr. Cabrera arrived at his usual 7:15 and ordered his decaf without his usual joke about the weather. The 2 retired bus drivers in booth 4 kept glancing at the front window. Even Sheila, the hairdresser who came in 3 mornings a week and could talk through a tornado, was unusually subdued. Around 9, Marisol understood why. Mr. Cabrera caught her elbow as she refilled his cup. Mija, he said softly, the whole block knows. Knows what? That Vance Roker was here yesterday. She froze with the coffee pot tilted. Don't be scared, he said quickly. Nobody's scared. We're paying attention. The hardware store called the bookstore. The bookstore called the dry cleaner. The dry cleaner called my niece. My niece called me. We know what kind of man came through that door, Marisol, and we know your father would not have been afraid of him, and we are not going to be afraid of him either. But we are watching out for you. Entiendes? She squeezed his hand. She could not speak for a moment. At 11, Renata Vosberg from the bookstore walked into the Bluebird. She had not been inside the diner in over a year. Her arthritis made the 3-block walk hard, and she came in slowly, leaning on a wooden cane Marisol recognized as the one her late husband had carved. Renata was small and silver-haired, and wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She made it to the counter, sat down with great effort, and folded her hands in front of her. Marisol, she said. Her voice was thin but steady. My landlord called me this morning. He apologized to me. He said the rent increase had been a misunderstanding. He said my rent would in fact be going down $12 a month for the next 10 years to make up for the inconvenience. He sounded like a man who had not slept. She looked up at Marisol over her reading glasses. Would you like to tell me why? Marisol could feel Loop staring from the kitchen. Renata, she said carefully, I made a deal. With whom? With somebody who owed my father a debt he didn't know he was carrying. The old woman studied her for a long moment. Then she reached across the counter and took both of Marisol's hands in her own. Child, she said, I knew your father for 31 years. He bought a poetry book from me every Christmas for your mother and pretended every year that he had just discovered the existence of poetry. He could not have lied to save his life. You have his face when you are holding back, did you know that? The exact same face. She squeezed Marisol's hands. I am not going to ask what kind of deal. I am going to say thank you. And I am going to say something else. Whatever you have walked into, you do not walk out of it alone. You hear me? Not alone. She pressed something into Marisol's palm, a small brass key on a faded blue ribbon. This opens the back door of the bookstore. If anything ever happens, any night, any hour, you come through that door and you do not knock. You hear me? Marisol nodded. She could not trust her voice. Renata Vosberg made her slow way back out into the street. The bell tinkled behind her. That evening, after the dinner crowd had thinned, Marisol stood alone behind the counter, polishing glasses and watching the street go dim. The rain had stopped. The streetlights had come on. She thought about her father's letter. She thought about the cedar box. She thought about Theo Marchetti, a man she had never met, who would walk through her door tomorrow night with 8 weeks left to live, and a memory of her father's pie still alive somewhere in the back of his throat. And she thought about Vance Roker, about the half-second flicker behind his eyes when he had seen the Christmas lights, about the way he had said your father was a better man than my father, about the silver pen and the folded slip of paper she still had not opened, sitting in the drawer beneath the register. She had not opened it because she was afraid of what it would say. She opened it now. It was not an address. It was not a phone number. It was not a threat or a contract or a name. It was 4 words, in a hand she somehow already recognized. Don't be afraid tomorrow. She stared at it for a full minute. Then she folded it again, slid it into the pocket of the green apron, and locked the front door of the Bluebird behind her. She did not see the second black car parked across the street, 3 storefronts down, with its lights off and its engine cold. She did not see the man inside it lower his binoculars when she turned the key. He was not one of Vance Roker's men. Thursday at 7:15, Marisol turned the sign in the window from open to private event and stood very still in the middle of the empty diner. Lupe had outdone herself. The pot roast was resting under foil on the back of the stove. The biscuits were warm in the basket. The pie was on the windowsill cooling, exactly as her father had cooled his the windowsill, not a wire rack, because air that has known the street tastes different than air that has known a kitchen, he used to say, and she had believed him because she was 8 and because he was right. The diner smelled like a Sunday in 1992. Marisol had cleaned every booth twice. She had put a single white candle on her mother's window booth, in a small green glass holder that had belonged to her grandmother. She had not changed her clothes. She had not put on lipstick. She was wearing the green apron over a clean white shirt, and her hair was pulled back the way it had been pulled back yesterday and the day before. She was not going to perform. She was going to cook. At 7:28, the cars pulled up. There were only 2 of them this time, not 3. Marisol watched through the window as Vance Roker stepped down from the lead car and went directly to the second one without looking at the diner. He opened the rear passenger door himself. A young woman in nurse's scrubs came out first, then a folded wheelchair, then slowly, with a great deal of help from both his wife and his nurse, Theo Marchetti. He was very thin. That was the first thing Marisol noticed. Vance had said cancer. She had not been ready for what cancer actually looked like on a man who was barely 45. His skin had the yellowed translucency of old paper. There was a wool blanket across his lap even though the rain had stopped and the night was mild. He wore a gray suit that no longer fit him, and a bright red bow tie that very obviously did, that he had clearly insisted on for tonight. His wife, a tall woman with kind, exhausted eyes, bent and adjusted the tie with the particular tenderness of a person who had been adjusting it for 30 years. Their 2 adult children stood behind the wheelchair, a son in his 20s and a daughter slightly older, both of them holding themselves very still in the way people hold themselves when they are trying not to cry in public. Behind them, an older man, Theo's other oldest friend, Marisol guessed, leaned on a cane. Vance Roker pushed the wheelchair to the door himself. The bell tinkled. Theo Marchetti looked up the moment he was inside and his entire face changed. He did not see Marisol at first. He saw the wallpaper. He saw the dollar bill above the register. He saw, on the wall behind the counter, the framed photograph of Hector Quintero in his green apron that Marisol had hung there the day after her father's funeral. And Theo Marchetti, dying in his wheelchair, lifted one trembling hand and pointed at the photograph and said in a voice that was almost gone, but still there, "Hey, old man, I told you I'd be back." His wife pressed both her hands against her mouth. His daughter turned her face into her brother's shoulder. Marisol came out from behind the counter. She did not know what her face was doing. She crossed the floor and crouched down beside the wheelchair so she would be at his eye level, and she took his cold, thin hand in both of hers. "Mr. Marchetti," she said, "I'm Hector's daughter. My name is Marisol." His eyes, which had been bright and far away, focused on her, and he smiled. A real smile, the kind that crinkled the corners. "You have his eyebrows," he whispered. "I've heard. Did he ever tell you he used to let me lick the spoon?" "He told me he never let anyone lick the spoon." Theo's smile widened. "He lied to you, sweetheart. He lied to you for 30 years. She laughed. She actually laughed. And it cracked something open in the room, and his wife laughed too, with tears running down her face, and his son gave a single shaky exhale, and even the nurse smiled. Marisol stood up, squeezed Theo's shoulder once, and said, "Your booth is ready, Mr. Marchetti. Come sit down. I'm going to feed you the best meal you've had in a year." They settled him at her mother's window booth. The candle was lit. The wheelchair fit alongside it perfectly, as if the booth had been waiting for it. Marisol brought out the biscuits first because biscuits were the one thing her father had insisted should always come before anything else. Bread is the handshake of a meal. Mija and she watched Theo Marchetti pick up a warm biscuit with a hand that shook badly and bring it to his face, and just smell it, with his eyes closed, for a long moment, before he took the smallest possible bite. He looked up at his wife and said very softly, "Yeah, that's it. That's the smell." She brought out the soup, then the pot roast. She moved through the meal the way her father had moved through meals, slowly, without hovering, refilling waters before they were empty, replacing forks before they were dropped. Loop stayed in the kitchen, but Marisol could feel her at the door, listening. Vance Roker sat at the far end of the table, mostly silent, watching his oldest friend eat real food for what was probably the last time in his life. He ate very little himself. He just watched. When Marisol brought out the pie, Theo Marchetti began to cry. Quietly, without sound, just two long lines of water sliding down a face that had forgotten how to make tears recently and was remembering. His wife took his hand. His daughter made a small noise and got up and went to stand by the window, her back to the table. Marisol set the pie down. She cut him the smallest slice. She put it in front of him. Theo, Vance said quietly from the end of the table the first time anyone had heard him use the name out loud all night. You don't have to eat it, brother. Shut up, Vance, Theo said, smiling through the water on his face. Shut your mouth and let me have my pie. He ate 3 bites. He could not manage more. But the 3 bites he ate with both hands wrapped around the fork like a child, and his eyes closed, and his head tilted slightly back, the way a man receives communion. Marisol, behind the counter, turned her face away and pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. When she turned back, Vance Roker was watching her. His face was not the face he had walked in with 2 days ago. Whatever had been carved into it had softened, not in a soft way, in a cracked way, like stone that had been hit with something it hadn't expected. He held her gaze for a long second across the diner. He did not nod. He did not smile. He just looked at her, and Marisol understood, without a single word being exchanged, that something in this man had broken open at her counter and was not going back to the shape it had been. And that was the moment. Exactly that moment. When the front door of the Bluebird Diner opened without the bell ringing because someone had reached up and held the bell silent with their hand, and 3 men she had never seen before walked in. The first one was already pulling a knife from his coat. The next 4 seconds did not happen in order. Marisol would think about them for the rest of her life and never be able to put them in the right sequence. What she knew was this: Vance Roker was on his feet before she fully registered the door opening. Theo's nurse, the small young woman in scrubs, who had spent the entire dinner quietly cutting his food into smaller pieces, had a hand inside her medical bag and came up with a heavy steel oxygen wrench that Marisol distantly understood was not being used as a wrench. Lupe screamed her name from the kitchen doorway. Theo's son had already shoved his sister down behind the booth. And Marisol herself, without thinking, without even feeling her own legs move, had grabbed the green glass candle holder off her mother's window booth and was halfway across the floor with it raised over her head. The first man's arm came back to throw the knife. It struck the framed photograph of Hector Quintero behind the counter, blade first. The glass shattered. Her father's face stayed where it was. After that, everything moved very fast. Vance Roker hit the first man somewhere below the ribs, and the man went down hard against the door. The nurse moved with surprising speed across the diner floor and brought the steel wrench down hard against the second man's wrist, knocking the blade out of his hand before he had finished raising it. The third man saw what was happening and turned to run, and Marisol, all 5'6" of her, brought the green glass candle holder down across the back of his head with both hands, and a sound came out of her that she had never made before in her life. He dropped to his knees. Lupe came out of the kitchen with the cast iron skillet she had been seasoning for 10 years, and she did not hit him with it because he was already on the floor. She just stood over him with it raised, breathing hard. Outside, Vance's 2 men who had been taking up positions on the sidewalk all night without ever once stepping inside were already on the radio. Theo Marchetti was still in his booth. He had not moved. His wife had thrown herself across him the moment the door opened, and she was still there, half covering him, her hands fisted in the lapels of his too big gray suit. Theo was looking up at her with an expression of mild, almost amused surprise. Like he could not believe, after everything cancer had already done to him, that the universe had thought to send him this on top of it. "Lena," he said quietly to his wife. "Lena, sweetheart, I'm okay. I'm okay. Look at me." She looked at him. She kept crying. She did not move. The whole thing, from the bell, that didn't ring to the third man on the floor had taken less than 15 seconds. Vance Roker stood in the middle of Marisol's diner, breathing hard, his charcoal overcoat splashed with rainwater and something darker at the cuff. He looked at the three men on the floor. He looked at his oldest friend in the booth. He looked at Marisol, standing with the broken candle holder still in her hand, and her father's shattered photograph on the floor behind her. And his face did something she would never be able to describe accurately even years later. It was not anger. It was something much worse than anger. It was the face of a man who had spent 30 years believing he could keep the people he loved separate from the life he led, and had just been shown, in the space of 15 seconds, exactly how wrong he had been. "They weren't mine," he said. His voice was very low. "Marisol, look at me. Those men were not mine." "I know," she said. She was surprised to hear how steady her own voice was. "I figured that part out. Theo wasn't supposed to be a target. Theo has never been a target. I believe you. There's a man named Sully Brennan." The name came out of him like he was spitting glass. "He's been waiting 19 years for a clear chance at me. He must have heard about tonight. He must have thought—" He stopped. He could not finish the sentence. He looked at Theo in the booth, at the wife holding him, at the daughter slowly rising from the floor. And Marisol saw the exact moment Vance Roker understood that his dying friend had almost been killed in the diner of the man who had once fed him biscuits for free. Because of him, because of the shape of his life, because Vance had walked through Marisol's door 2 days ago, and someone had been watching. He turned and walked outside without another word. Marisol heard him on the sidewalk. He was not yelling. He was speaking very quietly into a phone, in a voice that did not sound human, and she found she did not want to know what he was saying. Sirens started up somewhere in the distance. Vance's men had clearly made the call before the door had even opened, and she set the broken candle holder down on the counter. Her hands were shaking now. They had not shaken during. They were shaking now. She walked over to the booth. "Mr. Marchetti," she said softly. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." "Lena, baby, please sit up, I can't breathe." His wife sat up, embarrassed and sobbing. Theo straightened his bow tie with unsteady fingers and looked up at Marisol with the same bright, far-away eyes he'd had when he first came through the door. "Your father," he said, "would have done exactly what you just did. I broke my mother's candle holder. He would have been so proud of you he wouldn't have been able to talk for a week." Marisol pressed her hand against her mouth and turned her face away. The police arrived 4 minutes later, but they were not the police she had expected. They were a quieter kind. They came in without lights. They took the 3 men out the back through the alley, and the men did not appear on any news report, then or after. Vance came back inside while it was happening. He did not look at Marisol. He went to the booth and he knelt in his charcoal coat, on the linoleum floor of the Bluebird Diner beside Theo Marchetti's wheelchair, and he took his oldest friend's hand in both of his. "Theo," he said. "Brother, I am so sorry." "Vance," Theo said. "Shut up. I almost—" "Vance." Theo's hand tightened, with what little strength he had left, around his cousin's. "Listen to me. Listen. The pie was perfect. The pot roast was perfect. The biscuits were the biscuits. I came home tonight. I came home. You did that. Don't you dare apologize for the best night I have had in a year. Don't you dare." Vance Roker, at 44 years old, in front of his oldest friend's wife and children and a nurse who had just saved their lives and a diner owner he had known for 48 hours, lowered his head onto Theo Marchetti's lap and wept. It was not theatrical. It was not loud. It was the soft, completely dismantled weeping of a man who had not allowed himself to do this in 30 years and was finding out, in real time, that he still knew how. Theo's free hand came up and rested on the back of Vance's head with the exhausted tenderness of an older brother who had been waiting his entire life for this exact moment and was not going to waste it. Marisol turned and walked into the kitchen so that she would not be in the room. Lupe was standing at the sink, the cast iron skillet still in her hand, tears running silently down her face. She set the skillet down carefully, as if it might shatter, and pulled Marisol into a hug. They stood there for a long time without speaking. Outside the kitchen, Marisol could hear the soft murmur of Theo's family, his daughter laughing and crying at once, his son saying something to his mother, the nurse moving competently among them all. She could hear Vance Roker's breathing slowly steady itself. She could hear the rain starting up again on the roof of the diner her father had built. She did not yet know what tomorrow was going to look like. She did not know that by morning every newspaper in the city would have a different, smaller, wrong version of what had happened tonight. She did not know that the man in the cold black car across the street, the one who was not one of Vance's men, the one she had not seen, would disappear from the city by morning and never be heard from again, in a way that nobody in any official capacity would investigate. She did not know that Theo Marchetti would live 9 more weeks instead of 6, and would ask, on 3 different evenings in those 9 weeks, to be wheeled back to the Bluebird for pie. She knew only this: her father had built this place to feed people. And tonight, for the first time in 6 years, she understood what he had really meant by that. She stayed in the kitchen with Lupe, the skillet on the counter between them, until Vance Roker came in to say that he was taking Theo home now, and that he would be back tomorrow, alone, to talk to her. She nodded. She walked them all to the door. She watched the cars pull away. She locked the front door. She turned out the lights. And then Marisol Quintero sat down on the floor of her diner, with her back against the counter and her father's shattered picture on the linoleum beside her, and did not move for a very long time. She did not sleep. She did not go upstairs to the apartment. She did not go to her own house 20 minutes away. She sat on the floor until almost 3 a.m., and then she got up, and she swept up the broken glass, and she took her father's photograph carefully out of its ruined frame and set it flat on the counter under a dish towel. She wiped down the booths. She washed the dishes from the dinner she had served. She put the leftover pie in the cooler. She did all of this in complete silence. Around 5 a.m., as the sky over Halsted Street started turning that pale pre-dawn gray that she had been watching her whole adult life, Marisol unlocked the front door of the Bluebird and turned the sign back to open. Mr. Cabrera was the first one in. He was always the first one in. He paused in the doorway. He looked at the spot on the wall where her father's photograph used to hang. He looked at her, behind the counter, in last night's clothes with last night's eyes. He did not ask. He sat down in the window booth, not her mother's booth, never her mother's booth, and opened his crossword and tapped the table once, gently, with 2 fingers. "Decaf, please, mija," he said, like nothing had happened, like everything had. She poured him decaf. By 6:30 the diner was full. By 7 the line was out the door. Nobody had announced anything. Nobody on the block had been told. But the breakfast regulars had come in the way they always came in, and behind them had come people Marisol did not recognize, neighbors of neighbors, second cousins, the man who ran the bodega on 7th, the woman who taught Sunday school at the Lutheran church Renata Vosberg attended. They had come because Mr. Cabrera had called his niece at 4 a.m., and his niece had called the dry cleaner, and the dry cleaner had called the bookstore. The whole block had decided, sometime in the night, that the Bluebird was going to be very busy this morning, and that Marisol Quintero was not going to stand at her counter alone. Renata came in at 7:40 leaning on her husband's cane. She ordered coffee. She did not drink it. She just sat at the counter and held it between her 2 hands and made eye contact with every single person who came through the door and nodded at them like a small, silver-haired sentry. At 9 o'clock, a man Marisol did not know walked in carrying a brown paper package the size of a hardcover book. He was in his 60s. He wore a postal uniform, but he was not their regular postman. "Miss Quintero?" he said politely. "Yes. This is for you. Hand delivery. No signature." He set the package on the counter and tipped his cap and left. Marisol unwrapped it slowly, with the whole diner pretending not to watch. It was a frame. A simple, clean, dark wood frame the exact size of the one that had been shattered last night. There was no note. There was no card. There was nothing inside the frame yet. It was empty, ready for a photograph. She understood, the way she had understood everything Vance Roker had not said to her so far, that the frame had been chosen and delivered before 9 in the morning by a man who had not slept either. She placed her father's photograph inside it. She hung it on the wall behind the counter, in the exact spot it had always been. The whole diner was watching her now, and not pretending. Mr. Cabrera, at his booth, set down his crossword and stood up. He did not say anything. He just stood up. And one by one, every person in the Bluebird Diner, the regulars, the new faces, the man from the bodega, Renata Vosberg with her cane, Lupe in the kitchen doorway stood up too. Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. They just stood. It lasted maybe 15 seconds. Then Mr. Cabrera sat back down, and so did everyone else. And Marisol turned her back to the room and pretended very hard to be doing something with the coffee filters. At 10:30, Vance Roker walked in. He was alone. No coat this time, just a black sweater and dark jeans, and Marisol realized she had never seen him in anything but a suit. He looked older this morning, not tired older. He stopped just inside the door and waited until she came out from behind the counter. "Can we talk outside?" he asked quietly. They stood on the sidewalk in front of the Bluebird, in the soft gray light, with the cars from last night nowhere to be seen. The street was the street again, just a street, just a Friday morning. "Theo is asking when he can come back for pie," Vance said. "His wife wants to know if next Tuesday is too soon." "Next Tuesday is fine." Marisol. "Mr. Roker." "Vance." She looked at him. She nodded once. "Vance." He held her eyes for a moment. Then he looked down at his shoes, and for the first time she saw, properly, who he was when nobody who feared him was watching. "I am leaving," he said quietly. "What I do, who I am. I started leaving at 7:28 last night, when I saw Theo's face in your doorway, and I finished leaving at 7:43 when those men came through it. I have already made the calls. It is going to take time. It is not clean. There are people who will not let me leave easily, but I am leaving. That's not because of me. No. It's because of Theo. And it's because of your father. And it's a little because of you, Marisol Quintero. But only the part where you broke a candle holder over a man's head in defense of my dying friend, which I am going to think about every day for the rest of my life." A small, almost smile. "Mostly it's because I have spent 30 years pretending that the man my father raised is a man I had to keep being. He isn't. I have known he isn't for a long time. I just didn't have anywhere to put down what I was carrying. I think last night I started to. What are you going to do instead?" "I don't know yet. Something small, something with my hands. Theo built houses. I always thought that was a beautiful life, and I told myself I wasn't allowed to want it." He looked at the Bluebird. "At the wallpaper through the window. Your father built this place with his hands. Maybe I'll build something." "Vance." "Yes. Don't disappear." He looked at her for a long moment. He nodded once. "I won't." He turned and walked away down Halsted Street, in the gray morning, with both hands in his pockets, and he did not turn around. Marisol stood on the sidewalk and watched him until he was a small, dark shape at the end of the block, and then she went back inside her diner. Mr. Cabrera was waiting at the counter with 2 fresh cups of decaf, one for her, one for him. She sat down beside him. She drank it. She did not say anything for a long time. Outside, the rain started up again. Inside, the Bluebird Diner kept doing what the Bluebird Diner had been doing since 1987. 2 months later, Theo Marchetti died at home, in his own bed, with his wife holding one hand and Vance holding the other. Marisol went to the funeral. She wore black. She sat near the back. Theo's wife found her afterward in the small church kitchen and hugged her for a long time and pressed a small wrapped package into her hands and told her not to open it until she got home. Marisol opened it that night. It was Theo's red bow tie, folded carefully, with a note in his wife's handwriting. "He wanted you to have this," he said, Tell her thank you for the biscuits. Tell her thank you for the pie. Tell her I came home." Marisol cried for the second time in 2 months. Then she went to the cedar box. She took out, from underneath the stack of letters, an envelope she had not opened in 7 years, the one from Case Western, that she had never written back to. She sat at the kitchen table in the apartment above the Bluebird, and she opened her laptop, and she wrote an email. It was 3 paragraphs long. It explained who she was and what had happened and where she had been. It asked one question. It hit send before she could lose her nerve. The reply came 48 hours later from a dean she had not known was still alive. It was 4 lines long. "Marisol, your seat has been waiting for you. It's been waiting for 7 years. Come back when you can. We'll figure out the rest together. K." She started in the spring semester. Part-time at first, then full. She kept the diner open. Lupe became co-manager and got a real raise and a real title and put her name on the door beside Marisol's Quintero and Cervantes, proprietors, and Mr. Cabrera became their unofficial morning supervisor and was very serious about it. Renata Vosberg, who was now 72 and not going anywhere, opened a small reading corner at the back of the bookstore in Hector Quintero's name. There was a framed photograph of him there, too, in his green apron, the one Vance had quietly arranged to be reprinted and matted from the photo of him at the counter with 2 small boys. Vance Roker did not disappear. He kept his word. He moved into a small house in a quieter part of the city, a house with a workshop in the garage. He started with a single chair, a simple one, walnut. He brought it to the diner 3 months after Theo's funeral and set it up at her mother's window booth and said, quietly, that he had thought the booth could use a chair on the wheelchair side, in case Theo's wife ever wanted to come and sit there alone for a while. She did. 3 or 4 times a year she came, and sat in Vance's chair, and ate a slice of pie, and did not talk to anyone. Vance and Marisol did not become a love story. That would have been too neat. What they became was something rarer and harder to name. He came in for breakfast 3 times a week. He sat at the counter, never in a booth. He ordered the same thing every time, 2 eggs, biscuit, black coffee. He read the newspaper. He left a tip that was always exactly 20% and never $1 more, because Marisol had told him, in the 2nd week, that anything over 20% felt like a man trying to apologize for something with money, and she would not accept it. He laughed. He still laughed about it 8 months later. He paid 20%. Sometimes, on slow afternoons, they talked. About her father. About his mother. About the green velvet couch and the workshop in the garage, and the chair she had told him needed a small dovetail joint at the corner, because that was how her father had built things, and he had not known that, and now he did. Sometimes they did not talk. Sometimes he sat at the counter and read his paper, and she polished glasses behind it, and the silence was the silence of 2 people who had stopped needing to fill silences. In the 3rd year, Marisol passed the bar. She kept the diner. She also took her first case pro bono out of a small office Renata Vosberg let her set up in the back room of the bookstore. The case was for a single mother 3 blocks over whose landlord was trying to evict her on a technicality. Marisol won it in 6 weeks. She took her 2nd case the next month. By the end of the 5th year, there was a hand-painted sign in the back room of Vosberg and Daughter that read Quintero Law Halsted Street Tenants and Working People Walk-ins, welcome in her own handwriting, because she had not let anyone else paint it. She did not become famous. She did not become rich. She fed people in the morning and represented them in the afternoon. And on Sundays, she closed the diner for 1 hour at noon and went up to the apartment above it and sat on the green velvet couch with her father's letter and a cup of coffee and just sat. Most of what mattered after that night happened quietly. But the night itself, the night the bell did not ring, the night the candle holder broke, the night Theo Marchetti ate 3 bites of apple pie and called it coming home that night did not happen quietly. That night kept happening, in different shapes, in the lives of everyone who had been in the room. Lupe stopped flinching when men raised their voices in the diner. Renata kept her bookstore. Mr. Cabrera lived to be 84 and was buried with a Bluebird Diner coffee mug at his request. Vance Roker, who had walked into a diner believing he was the most powerful person in the room, walked out understanding he had been the smallest one. And Marisol Quintero, who had hung up on him on a Tuesday morning because nobody calls her father's diner a dump on her watch, walked into a courtroom 4 years later and stood at a podium in a dark suit and argued her first paid case with her father's letter folded in her jacket pocket and her mother's apron hanging on a hook in the back room of Vosburgh and daughter and the green glass shards of a candle holder she had never thrown away in a small bowl on her desk. She did not win every case after that. Nobody wins every case, but she stopped being afraid of the rooms she walked into. And the diner her father built in 1987, the diner a powerful man had once called a dump on the phone, kept its lights on through every winter and every recession and every change on the block, because the people on Halsted Street had decided, on one rainy night, that some places are not allowed to close. If you've made it to the end of this story, do me one last thing. Look at the people on your block. The old man who reads the paper at the counter. The woman who runs the bookstore 3 doors down. The cook in the kitchen who has been there longer than the wallpaper. They are not background. They are the reason the lights stay on. And when somebody powerful drives up one morning and tells you that what you have built is a dump, you remember Marisol Quintero, who was 32 years old and tired, and who picked up the phone, and who said no, and who changed 2 lives because of it, including, in the end, her own. Drop a comment with one word that describes the place where you grew up. I read every one. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are allowed to say no to people who are bigger than them. The lights at the Bluebird Diner are on. They're going to stay on.